You're watching Shalom TV, celebrating all things Jewish.
Jewish Education in Media is pleased to present L'Chaim, a program that highlights the people, issues, and events of importance to the Jewish community. Now here is your host, Rabbi Mark Golub.
I'm Mark Golub, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with some of the lovely and wonderful traditions that create the Shabbat, an island of time, as Abraham Joshua Heschel called it, when the world and its cares are put on hold so that people can refresh their souls and give their full attention to what matters most in this world, the people they love. And one of the most wonderful traditions of the Shabbat is one that many modern Jews either don't know about or just don't incorporate into their Shabbat observance. The reading of a most beautiful passage from the biblical book of Proverbs, which honors the mother and wife of the family. Every Shabbat, the woman of the household is honored at the Shabbat table as her husband and children recite or chant Proverbs 31, known in Hebrew as Eshet Chayil, or by its common English name, a Woman of Valor. And as America prepares to celebrate Mother's Day, we'd like you to see a book dedicated to the women of valor in our lives, entitled More Precious Than Pearls, which, if you know the reading, is one of the opening lines of the passage. More Precious Than Pearls was conceived, edited, and published by one of the most creative individuals on the American Jewish scene today, Mark Perlman, who then asked a number of thoughtful Jewish men and women to write a modern commentary and to reflect upon the Eshet Chayil poem. And Mark was kind enough to bring two of his contributors to his book to our studios in New York to help us celebrate Mother's Day and to talk about one of the most beautiful tributes ever written to women, which truly enriches a family celebration of the Shabbat. And so we're pleased to be joined by Sarah Esther Crisp, a professional writer and the creator and editor of the women's site www.thejewishwoman.org. Sarah is also the editor of the Society and Living section of the Chabad website, www.chabad.org, which is the largest Jewish website today. And we're also pleased to be joined by Rabbi Jeffrey Siegelman, who for the past 25 years has served as the rabbi of the Westchester Jewish Center, a conservative synagogue in Mamaroneck, New York. Here then, for Mother's Day, is our discussion of the Eshet Chayil. Sarah and Jeff, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
First of all, it's lovely that you contributed to Mark's book on Eshet Chayil, Woman of Valor. He called you out of the blue. What? How did you learn, Sarah, you were going to be writing for the book?
I've been fortunate to know Mark for some time.
Yes.
And we have collaborated on other projects in the past. So he had emailed me about this, and I was extremely excited because Eshet Chayil is something I'm very passionate about. Mark did not know it at the time, but I do teach an entire course on it, and as editor of thejewishwoman.org, clearly women's issues and women in Judaism
Perfect for you.
Is right up my alley.
Okay.
So that was how I got involved.
And Jeff, how does he happen to come to you?
Mark, from time to time, actually more than from time to time, he davens in our synagogue, so I've gotten to know him.
He davens everywhere, you know.
I know. That's why I'm kind of reluctant to say he davens a lot, because he has to divide his time. But And he's asked me to collaborate on a number of things with him, and I've always found a reason to say no. But this time, this was good. This was a project that was really too good to say no. And he's a very hard person to say no to, as you're well aware.
Yes.
Impossible.
So,
But why would anyone want to say no?
And it became a pleasure.
So, I want to know what each of you make, first of all, of the Eshet Chayil poem. And since you teach it, Sarah, I want to begin with you. And again, if you teach it, and I think you told me you do it over a period of weeks.
Yes.
Okay. So obviously, we could spend hours on it. But I'm looking right here for, like, you know, your overview, a summary for you of, you know, what's it all about and why is it so important to you?
I actually think it's one of the most misunderstood texts. You know, it's something, like you said, that's a beautiful tradition Friday night, and then you excite your guests and say, you know, we're going to sing this beautiful poem honoring the Jewish woman, and they look through the English translation, and they're really not blown away. You know, like, they're like, oh, okay, you know, she separates the wool and linen, and she plants a vineyard, and it seems very inaccessible. And I love teaching the course because it's a text so complete with meaning and depth and so applicable to the modern Jewish woman.
I agree 100%.
So, yeah, I mean, the way I teach it, it's alphabetical. So we spend...
Explain what that means.
It goes through in a linear way where each verse begins with a different letter of the Hebrew alphabet.
Actually, a consecutive letter
consecutive,
of
exactly.
the alphabet. Right.
Exactly. So it goes through consecutively. And there are the 22 verses. And according to the different midrashim, there are 19 women that are alluded to. Sorry, 20 women that are alluded to in the verses because the last 3 are all the same woman.
And I want to make sure people understand. In other words, based on the commentary, it's not
Yes.
it's not on the Peshat, the literal text.
Exactly.
But the commentaries see in each line a reference to another famous presence, woman
Or
presence.
not so famous.
That's correct.
That's what's interesting
right.
about it.
But another female presence that has in some way influenced really traditional Jewish life, because we're not talking about modern characters here.
Right. We're talking about biblical women.
Yes.
We're talking about some women that are very well known, like the matriarchs, and some women that are completely not well known.
For example?
You have the Shunammite woman. You have Eshet Ovadia, the wife of Ovadia. You have Rachav. The first verse.
Rachav is known.
Rachav's known, that's true. But the first verse even is really interesting because you would think we're starting off Eshet Chayil, you know, like which big, amazing woman is this going to be? And then, I don't know if you're familiar with who it is. So it's Naamah.
Really?
Naamah, the wife
Tell
of
us
Noah.
Right.
So, which is fascinating, you know, I think. And there's so much depth. The way the woman is not just referenced by the verse itself, but the meaning that's inherent in that, the way it connects to the letter. Every letter in Hebrew has a meaning. The letter itself is a word. Beit, for example, is the word for bayit, for a home. You know, you have the numerical equivalent of that letter. You have the form of the letter. There's so much depth in that and the message and how that relates
So you could
to
spend
the verse.
weeks studying Eshet Chayil.
We spend an hour a week per verse,
Yes.
and we could definitely continue.
That's lovely.
There's so much depth there and so much beauty.
Jeff, what do you make of it, and why is it important to you? And you said that you've said no to other things that Mark asked you,
Yeah,
but when it came to the Eshet Chayil, you couldn't say no.
I wouldn't compare the Eshet Chayil to the other things. That was more of where I was at in my head. But Eshet Chayil, I came to it in a very different way, because I didn't come to an appreciation of Eshet Chayil from inside the text. In some ways, it could have been anything. It could have said anything. I was a new groom, and it is the first Friday night of my married life, and I'm wondering, you know, how does one do that? How does one be a husband now? I've never been a husband before. It's the first Shabbos that I'm a husband, and I knew that one of the things that I was supposed to do, though I'm not saying it as if it was a chore, I was excited about it, was to say Eshet Chayil, and to say it to my wife, and to say it in a way that transcended the text itself, but had to do with us. And that's how it started. It wasn't the inside of the text. It wasn't as if I had studied it and said, oh, this is remarkably meaningful. What was meaningful was the way that it was being expressed, not what it actually said. And then it just became a cornerstone of who we are and what we do.
Now, tell me about your family. You have a wife.
I have a wife, and I have 3 children.
How old?
I assume you're asking about my children.
Yes.
And not my wife. My oldest daughter is 26, and I have a son who's 23 and another son who's 20.
So they're all out of the house?
More or less. The 2 older are married and have children of their own.
So you're a grandfather.
And I am a grandfather of 3, and
Lovely.
please God, 2 more on the way.
That's lovely.
And my youngest is at Yeshiva University. As an undergraduate. So he's out of the house until he wants to come home. No.
You have been a pulpit rabbi for a long time.
31 years.
Okay. So it means on Friday night, you probably, I should ask, were you leading services every Friday night?
Actually, it's an interesting story. When I first started, I was the rabbi of a synagogue in Wayne, New Jersey. And there was, as at the time, there were in many conservative congregations, a late Friday night service. So it began at 8 or 8:15.
Correct.
And when we first started, when I first came there, I thought it was lovely because my wife and I would have dinner, and then we would go to services in the Yoneg Shabbat and come home, and it was great. And then my daughter was born. And I found myself rushing through dinner to leave my wife and my daughter to go. And then by the time I got home, they were asleep, and it was awful. And ultimately, it was why I left that congregation, because it didn't allow me to have a Friday night at home.
You understand, by the way, most Jews don't ever imagine the problem being a rabbi in a professional situation where you're leading services, what that does to a family's celebration of Shabbat. Yeah. But you understand what you described is so real for so many rabbis in America.
But I was incredibly lucky. I was incredibly lucky because I left there because of that. I loved the congregation. I went and I looked for congregations that had one thing and one thing only, and that was a Friday night service at sunset. I found one. I applied for it. I begged and pleaded to get the job. They gave me the job, though I was a little young, in their opinion. And I finally had a congregation where I was home a few minutes after the sun set and could spend it with my family.
That is the traditional model. The traditional model is the service comes before
dinner.
The father goes home and has Shabbat dinner with the family.
Right.
And is this the congregation you're in now?
Still there.
That's wonderful. Okay. So if I were in your home for years and years and years, as you return from the early Friday night service, and now you're with your family, you're a conservative rabbi.
Yes.
Should I imagine you have a sort of a mainstream conservative Jewish lifestyle?
I don't know. No.
Are you more Orthodox?
I am more Orthodox.
Okay.
Yeah. My home life is an Orthodox home.
Okay.
Yeah.
You went to JTS.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But you consider yourself on the more observant end of the conservative rabbinate?
I think so.
Okay. If I were in your home on Shabbat, would I have seen you do Eshet Chayil every Friday night?
Yes.
Okay. Did you bless your children every Friday night?
Yes.
Okay. If I were in your home on Friday night, does your husband do Eshet Chayil every Friday night?
Yes.
Okay. Do you understand, or do you agree with me that it is not a mainstream Jewish practice in America today?
We've had plenty of guests who have never heard of the custom. Absolutely.
Yes, and I'm betting, Jeff, that if your synagogue is mainstream conservative, there are many Jewish families that may have Shabbat in your congregation in their homes. They do not do Eshet Chayil.
You're absolutely right, because we have for a conservative congregation an astounding number of people who, while not necessarily Shomer Shabbos in a halachic sense, have very much a Friday night experience that includes not only candle lighting and Kiddush, but washing and motzi, and yet you are absolutely right. A tiny percentage have Eshet Chayil, and even those who are aware that it exists shy away from doing it.
But that is a wonderful verb. They shy away from it. Why?
I think for two reasons. First of all, there are those who are bothered by the lack of egalitarian spirit. But I would think just as many, if not more, it's hard. It requires you to know a lot of Hebrew.
And you can do it in English.
Yeah, but sometimes mysterious things sound better in Hebrew.
Well, that's what I was saying. The English doesn't carry with it.
By the way, I don't agree with the two of
power.
you. I do not agree. And I want you to let me read it. By the way, this is a condensed form. But I want the audience to understand, because you hear it in your ears, I want them to understand, if they've never heard it, at least some of it. It is a long passage.
Right.
So this is a condensed passage, and I want you to know, I don't know I can get through this without crying, because for me it's what you said. I would love to hear you do Drash, verse by verse, but for me this is a tribute to my wife.
Right.
And I cannot say enough about what she has done for me and my family. And so when I read this, it's about her. But this is the text, and again, this is a translation, so the reality is that different translations use different words for different translations of the Hebrew. Every translation is an interpretation. So I'll just give you this one, and if there's anything here that really bothers you, you may certainly comment on that as well. But this is one version in English of the Eshet Chayil, the Woman of Valor. An Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, who can find? For her worth is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, and he hath no lack of gain. She doeth him good and not evil all the days of her life. She giveth food to her household, strength and dignity are her clothing. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and the law of kindness is on her tongue. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done valiantly, but thou excellest them all. Isn't that lovely?
I absolutely agree that you picked the most beautiful and accessible passages completely. But there is something that I would like to say, though, which I think is part of the issue you always get with translation, because translation by definition is commentary, like you said.
Absolutely right.
But and interestingly enough, the piece I wrote for the book was specific to the first verse, and it's often translated, or honestly mistranslated, as rubies, and there's so much power and meaning in specifically the word panimim, which are pearls. So this idea, Eshet Chayil miyimtza, who can find a woman of valor, because her worth is so much greater, so much more valuable than pearls. And I'm not sure why that switch takes place. I've seen it a number of different, gems that suddenly will be used. But there's something, what I had written about specifically was, first of all, the concept of the chayal, that Eshet Chayil, a woman of valor, that the word for valor is also the word in Hebrew for soldier, a chayal.
By the way, my understanding is it really is soldier.
Yeah.
And that the word valor is an English commentary in and of itself. It's not a woman of valor. The Hebrew, and by the way, that's the problem with any translation.
Right.
If you understand the Hebrew, Eshet Chayil, which in some way is a paradox, and Eshet Chayil, because normally we associate the Chayil with the
Right.
male soldier. But it means that this is a woman who's engaged in sort of the battle of life.
Right, but you also do have the meaning of valor, because when you get to the end of Eshet Chayil, it's a Rabot Banot Asu Chayil. It
Yes.
uses it again, and there it's most definitely referring to valor and not the context.
Give me an example
of soldier.
of the word Chayil used in valor in the Tanakh, outside of this poem.
I can't do that off the top
I
of
don't
my
believe it.
head.
Yes, so I don't know why you say that. You say it as if it's a translated fact.
Because in the commentaries, usually it's referring to it both as valorous, and then the deeper meaning is referring to chayal as a soldier,
I know.
not the other way
All right, I asked the wrong
around.
question. What is valor to you?
So I find them very interlinked between the concept of a soldier and the concept of being valorous. One who is courageous, one who is continuously, what I think a soldier embodies, which is really what a woman embodies and a mother embodies, is this idea of constantly being concerned, aware, and focused, not just on her needs, but on the overall needs of everyone that she cares for and is involved with. And one of the interesting things, even with Mother's Day coming up, is that Mother's Day, as it's celebrated, is specific to women who have had children. That is what qualifies a mother. And in Judaism, it's not the case. You know, our first woman, Chava, Eve, is called Aim Kol Chai, the mother of all life, before she ever has children. So this idea of this woman of valor is not limited to a mother, but this idea that inherent and embodied in the concept of womanhood is this mothering capability of others. And even the idea, you know, that pregnancy is being able to be other-centered, to have one at your center, at your core. And so this soldier, this valorous woman, is one who in everything she does, it's one and the same. It's a completely united front. You know, the soldier has to obviously not just look out for his or her own safety, but the complete safety and needs of the entire troop. And so too, that embodied in her needs and what needs to be taken care of are the needs and the, you know, everything that her children, that her husband, that everybody that she cares for, that she puts at her core, at her center, take priority.
That's very, very lovely. Did it bother you that I only picked the loveliest passages?
Not at all. I love them
Okay.
as well.
Okay.
I just think that part of what you were saying and why this is not something that everybody immediately gravitates to and is comfortable reading in English is because I do think, and I've heard this a lot, that it does come across as archaic to some people, or they don't feel
Although
connected
nothing
to
I
it.
just read said an archaic.
Not at all. I'm saying in the context of the entire.
They should read my version.
You know,
then.
absolutely. But
Yeah, they do.
and then what we didn't discuss was the pearls and why a pearl is unique, because the pearl is something you have to search for. You know, it's at the bottom of the ocean. It's hidden within this oyster, and the pearl is formed by an irritation. It's, you know, from the irritation and fighting off something that's coming in to invade, the pearl sac is formed. So it's this beautiful concept that, you know, it's not that we need to look at a woman in valor and like, oh, well, you know, if I was like, you know, Sarah, our matriarch, or if I was like Rebecca, or if I was like this person, maybe I'd be a woman of valor, but that we're all women of valor. We all have this potential. We all, you know, fight for the needs of our family and our children. You know, don't get in the way of Mama Bear. Like, we all, you know, have that intense focus, and that specifically the challenges and the difficulties we've had make our beauty shine.
Okay, and I want you to know I'm taking the word ruby out.
Thank you.
I will never again say ruby.
Thank you.
Pearl
Thank
will
you.
be.
Pearl.
So what does valor mean to you?
I don't know. I have to think about it because I've never thought about it in this context.
But isn't it fascinating?
Yeah, I think valor.
That was
Valor.
wonderful what you said.
Valor
I loved
connotes.
it.
It connotes bravery. It connotes being principled, being willing to take risks to defend your principles.
I like that. But wait, I just want to backtrack for 1 second. You know, I will never forget it. When I was studying, I was very young, and we were studying a piece of the Mishnah Torah. And I'm in a Hebrew high school type setting, and I was not by any chance the most fluent in Hebrew of the class, but there was this very young, lovely guy next to me, and he was very good at Hebrew, and the rabbi said to him, "Okay, would you read the passage?" And he read a passage in Hebrew, and the rabbi then said to him, "Okay, what did you think of it?" And without missing a beat, he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't translating as I was reading." Meaning he was reading the Hebrew, the phonetic Hebrew, the music of the language, but it was cognitively not going into his head. So he had read it perfectly, but when the rabbi said to him, "Tell me what it said," he had to go back and read it, because he could translate it fine.
Right.
But he wasn't translating as he was reading. And I believe that happens in every language, even in English. There are times when we will read something out loud, and if you say to somebody, "What did you just say?" they have to go back and read it again. But I'm wondering whether, and Jeff, you'll have to be honest with me, whether you have said Eshet Chayil, have you said this, and as a whole, it has meant something to you. But I said to you, "What does valor mean to you?" And you said quite honestly to me, "You know, I've never thought about it." And that means even though you read Eshet Chayil every Shabbat, the totality had a power for you, not necessarily the specific words.
Right.
Isn't that interesting?
Well, I don't know whether I would go that far. There are certain times that we read texts or we study texts, and we read and we learn and we process with our brain. There are other texts, prayer is the most common, where if you have mastered the words in Hebrew and you know what they mean, then you're doing that experience now, but you're not doing it expending intellectual energy. You're trying to expend spiritual energy. You're not really focused on the vocabulary per se. You're focused on how the word is affecting you. You know what it means, but it's not the time to delve deeply. It's not the time to take out the dictionary or the thesaurus or to get the etymology. When you say Shema, we could have a long discussion about what it means to hear or to listen. But the word Shema, when you cover your eyes and you say that, you're not saying it with your brain. You're saying it with your soul. And I think Eshet Chayil, in many, many ways, for me, is exactly that. I'm not focused on the language itself, which is why it's never been archaic, because even if it was archaic, it wouldn't make any difference. I'm not coming from there. In the piece that I wrote, very often Eshet Chayil is sung. I don't sing Eshet Chayil. I made a conscious decision on the first Shabbos of our marriage. I have a sing-songy kind of ish to it, but it's more like a Gemara learning. It's just me. People do not sing with me. I say it looking at my wife. I didn't want it to be, and so the words.
Could you do a little bit of it? Do the first two lines.
Eshet Chayil miyim tzav rachok mipnei michra batach bala lev bala v'shala lo yachzar gemala tu tov v'lerako.
Beautiful. Does your wife understand Hebrew?
Yes.
Okay. So when she hears it, does she hear the words, do you think?
I think so, yes.
I do too.
But it's fun. Over the course of time, you certain words, either because of the way that they're intoned or because you know the meaning, they become kind of cute inside jokes.
Yes.
If something has happened during the week,
yes.
and it's reflected in one of the verses, and I might say it differently, and she'll immediately know what I'm talking about, and it becomes an inside joke, and we'll smile.
Very, very good.
I want to go back and just comment about the English. I think I never thought about it until you were reading, but I think one of the reasons why I don't do it in English, the first essay in the book is written by Gary Rosenblatt, and it's an outstanding essay. It's the second best. Sarah's is the best. It's the second best essay.
Thank you.
And he starts by saying, almost every Jewish woman has had Eshet Chayil said to her, but it's usually at her funeral. Because very often eulogies for Jewish women begin with Eshet Chayil.
That's very true.
And being a rabbi for so many years, I've said Eshet Chayil in the context of funerals to so many women. And the thought of saying it in English to my wife, because I only say it in English at funerals.
That's
I
crazy.
know, it's insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's completely insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But I didn't want
That's
it.
crazy.
I didn't want it to be the same.
That's crazy. That's just crazy.
Can I comment though, because I thought it was interesting with what you said in terms of the meaning of words, because I happen to feel very differently. I feel that everything we say needs to be a spiritual and emotional and intellectual connection and synthesis. And I think even when things are meaningful to us, and I notice this a lot with raising children, we can find something meaningful, like as you said, just by virtue of saying it can bring you to tears. But will it bring your kids to tears? Or if something's based on emotion and it doesn't have a connection, is that enough to pass down where it will therefore become meaningful to a generation, or like we were saying, to other people that don't have this connection, and it wasn't tradition, it wasn't something they were raised with, and it wasn't something that in and of itself is meaningful because we value it as a whole. So I find, I see this, there's the whole concept with education that there's both chinuch and hadracha, that chinuch is education, but it comes from chanech, which means to inspire. And we need to inspire, we need to wow, we need to have the emotions and the feelings. But if it ends there, and it's not then hadracha, is from derech, it's from integration. You need to inspire, but then you need to integrate. There needs to be something that takes this meaning and makes it palpable and real, and something that becomes something that can now become an actual living part of one's life. So I know from having learned it, every single time I hear it, every single time it's sung to me, and my husband's obviously learned this as well, and we've learned it together, I don't just hear the words. It's like saying I love you, but not paying attention anymore. Like, okay, love you, bye. Where it becomes words that we say because we know that's how you should end a conversation. It's nice, but I'm not thinking about them. I'm not connecting to those words. And with my kids, they were raised singing Eshet Chayil, so they sing it to me as well. But, my two oldest are girls. So my oldest, who's already had her bat mitzvah, now my second to oldest, who's preparing for her bat mitzvah, I learn the whole text with them, so that they now come to a point when it's being said, it's meaningful and it empowers them, and it's something they connect to and they feel good about. And there's that valor, that pride, and that idea of strength, that they know that as a Jewish woman, they're a foundation, and there's so much embodied in this, and it's not just a poem, because otherwise it's not relevant to them until somebody's singing it to them.
So
now
you wanted to have
them.
both emotional and cognitive, intellectual meaning to them.
I would say that in everything we do, there needs to be that, so that,
And what about Jeff's point that there is an element in prayer where the meaning of the words and almost the poetry of the Hebrew, and by the way, people who really know Hebrew,
right,
you can almost taste it. And there is a way in which the Hebrew language has this it puts one in a trance almost. That there is something to that concept of davening as opposed to praying. That the davening is one in which it's not anti-intellectual,
right,
but in some way it transcends intellect.
But I think it begins, there are times that, yes, you're completely in the moment and connecting to the power of it, but I think that experience is made so much more powerful by understanding it. So you're right, it doesn't need to be simultaneous, but I think the understanding is essential to being able to then lose yourself in the meaning, or without focus on the meaning, but being able to be in the experience.
Absolutely. It does start. Eshet Chayil is a good example. I remember the first time I said Eshet Chayil. I had my book, and I'm reading it, and I'm reading it carefully, and I'm reading it slowly. I'm not familiar with the words. Maybe I should have, but I never practiced. And so all of my energy that was being devoted to this moment was an intellectual energy. Say these words. Say them as nicely and as properly as you possibly can. And I think that that's how every ritual begins. The woman who's lighting candles, the first Shabbos of how many candles, where am I going to light them? Do I light the right one first or the left hand? Well, it doesn't matter, but you don't know that, so and I know I have to go like this. Do I go like this or do I go like this? And then do I memorize? I haven't memorized it, so you kind of have to cheat when you cover your eyes so you still see the blessing. So all of the energy is a kind of intellectual energy, but once you can accomplish the task without expending any intellectual energy, because it's so comfortable, it's so second nature, then you can start doing that experience with your soul and not with your brain. So it definitely starts with intellectual mastery, but it transitions to something. In prayer, when you know what you're doing, you don't need to expend that intellectual energy. You're davening with your soul. You're saying Eshet Chayil with your soul.
Or you could be doing it by rote, though.
Yes,
that's the danger.
Right.
You can quickly.
But that's true of everything.
Yes.
Right.
But and how do you, though, in anything, how do you ensure that it not become just
You keep learning.
something? Exactly. So,
keep
it's
learning.
constantly cycling where there has to be that element.
Yes, I think you're both saying the same thing in slightly different ways, and you're both right. Incidentally, it's true of all language. And the example that is easy for people to understand is, ever since 9/11, at many baseball games, professional baseball games, Major League Baseball games, in the middle of the seventh inning, they will now do God Bless America. And when 9/11 was fresh, the fact that all of a sudden, for the first time, 50,000 people were standing up and saying God Bless America, it was quite powerful.
Right.
Now it's done every game. It's 10 years later, and I believe that it's true of God Bless America, the Star Spangled Banner, the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. It can be said in such a way that the person speaking it doesn't hear, in the sense of the real Shema. It never really penetrates, that they're just saying words. And that certainly can be true of any Hebrew prayer as well. Absolutely. And both of your points, I believe, are very well taken. I want to just add, and to the extent to which you would agree with me, again, being a conservative rabbi, the experience of most, and I even believe it's true of many Orthodox Jews in America as well, when we say to a child, we want you to learn to read Hebrew, we don't mean read Hebrew. We mean pronounce Hebrew. We want you to learn the alphabet so that when you see a Daled, you know it makes a D sound. And if you see a Segol, it makes an S sound, and you can read a syllable, and then you can read a word. And we want you to be able to do V'yahavta et Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha v'chol madecha. We want you to be able to do it quickly, and we want you to feel comfortable with it. And it's going to become the music of your ear and your being. And there are many Jews who learn it, and if you say to them, what does it say? They do not have a clue. Right. No clue. Right. And whether it's a prayer, Al Kol Ele by Naomi Shemer, a fabulous poem. If you understand what the Davash and the Okets are, if you understand what she's trying to say, Al Bitenu Hatinoket, if you understand the words, when you sing that song, it has an enormous power. If you understand what it means when you say, Oseh Shalom b'mromav hu yaseh Shalom, Adonai oz li amo yatein. If these are not simply syllables, but they also have cognitive meaning. And what is language? It's images. If there are images that you convey to yourself when you say this, then as much as prayer is an emotional experience, I agree 100% with you. I believe it raises it to a level that is so profoundly moving. And I often want to say to my congregation in the midst of a prayer, do you understand the beauty of what you're saying? And not every prayer has that. Right. But there are moments when I just wish, and something, we do Shalom Aleichem on Shabbat, and most people sing it, they don't have a clue what they're saying. But
if you know the Gemara on it, then it's everything.
It's everything, this prayer that welcomes the angels. And the angels look in your home, and if the candles are lit, they go, so I don't know.
Right, and everything we do has, just like Eshet Chayil, so many layers and levels to meaning with that. You know, and it's something that I can tell you with educating our own children, they don't just learn how to read. If anything, they're constantly, you know, we're always stopping them. That was too fast. What are you saying?
Good for you.
And we're showing them what's the root. Do you understand that? Like, you know, I was just coming out of Nissan, you know, with my children. Like, what's the root of Nissan? Nace, right? Miracle. What's, you know, the word nisayon for a challenge, for a difficulty? Nace, right? Do you like? What does that teach you? How are miracles and challenges related? You know, and I think that's essential.
Yes, most Jews don't understand that Hebrew is based on a 3-letter root.
Exactly.
Yes,
and it is magic, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about this text, because it's magic. When you even if on the most basic translation you can be moved to tears, all the more so when the depth is there and the life lessons and, you know, the guidance and this handbook for parenting, for motherhood, for being, you know, a wife, for being in a relationship, for living one's life in the most meaningful and passionate way. It's all there, you know, it just needs to be
And
unwrapped.
when you now do Eshet Chayil, am I correct that you hear the commentary in
Absolutely.
it? You never can read it again the same way once you've heard the commentary, yes?
Well, we ran a post-high school program a number of years ago in Israel, and it was called Torah Chesed. And my girls, they're not girls, they're now women who are married with children of their own, still say to me, now that, you know, we've all reconnected via Facebook, that every single time
they hear
sing
Torah
it, they go,
Chesed.
Torah Chesed,
That's right, because
you
you
know?
make the
And
associations.
it's something that's so real to them, because that was when I first taught the course, was when I was running this school. That was who I prepared the course for. And they still write back and tell me about things that they think about every time it's said. So then it becomes, what I would agree with you is, it's not hard work. It's not thinking about, what does this mean? Right. But the meaning is so integrally related
You're
to the
making
emotion and the
midrash in your
spirit
mind all
that
the
it's
time.
there. It doesn't require the work.
Right.
It's almost like the easy knowledge, but
Exactly.
but that you're thinking. You know, I think it gets dangerous when we stop thinking and we just start doing, because then we start forgetting why we're doing it, and we lose the meaning in it.
Can I defend rote and mechanical just for a second with regard to Eshet Chayil? Because one of the things that I wrote in the essay was that that sometimes, Baruch Hashem, not often, but sometimes you sit down at the table and you're not husbands and wives are not always feeling warm fuzzies for each other every Friday night when the sun sets, simply because the sun is setting on Friday night. And you sit down at the table, and maybe you've had an argument, and certainly the last few hours before Shabbos are the most tense in any traditional household. If there was ever an environment in which you could lose it, that's it. And the fact that Eshet Chayil comes, for me, it forces me. It's mechanical. It's rote. I don't necessarily feel this intellectually that I want to say this right now, but it gives me an opportunity to look my wife in the eye, which I may not have done that day, and to say words. Both of us know what those words mean. We may not believe them at that particular moment, but the fact that Judaism is forcing us to look each other in the eye and demanding that I say these words, sometimes you rediscover a feeling, a good feeling, that you didn't have an hour ago or 5 hours ago.
I agree.
And it's a way of keeping feelings of love
Can I just add
alive.
something to
No,
that?
not yet. No. Because I want to just say this to you. What you said is beautiful. You only made one mistake. It has nothing to do with rote. Nothing. And your explanation showed us that. What you said was that the tradition has built into it a mechanism which transcends a moment by giving you and your wife Shabbat, even if you've had a hard week.
Right.
But you said it. At the moment that the tradition forces you to do Eshet Chayil, it isn't rote.
That's
and the
true.
reality
That's true.
is you
Poor
break
choice of
through. No, you break through.
Yes.
And you reestablish, and that's the genius of the Jewish tradition.
Absolutely.
It forces human beings to always come back to what's most important, the relationship. So thank goodness that even in the midst of all the tension and what may have, the nonsense that may have gone on, Shabbat comes and it vanishes like smoke because you do the Eshet Chayil. And the rote, which Sarah was referring to, which, by the way, you know better than I, is impermissible in Judaism. Anybody who does a mitzvah by rote, you're not yotzei. You have not fulfilled the mitzvah. Without kavanah, there can be no mitzvah. Now that doesn't mean we don't do mitzvot by rote. Sometimes we do. And the great, I don't know, you were a little bit too young for Heschel, but Heschel's whole point was, not only can you do things by rote, you cannot do things by rote. In other words, when people would say to him, if I do it every week, it becomes a habit. He can say, if you don't do it every week, that's a habit too. So the genius here is the Jewish tradition gives us a way to transcend the ordinary moment, and Shabbat becomes something profound. Now you can speak.
I agree with you both, by the way, completely.
Yeah, but he and I now agree. He didn't mean rote.
Exactly.
He did not
that's
mean
why I
rote.
said
He
I
said
agree with you.
no, because what Jeff said was
I agree with everything
profound.
he said up until the rote correction, and now I agree with you completely. I was going to say, which is just so powerful about this idea with speech, and we see it so intertwined with Shabbat in general. First of all, Shabbat being, it's not an acronym, that's, I can't think of the proper term, but it's a, it's for Shalom Bayit, right? I forget the actual term for how you say that Shabbat represents Shalom Bayit with the letters as well, but this idea that speech creates reality. We are called medaber, we are a speaker, and we see this when the woman begins and lights Shabbos candles. Her speech creates reality. She says that blessing, she's created Shabbos in her home. And what's powerful about that is that everything also has to do with the correct timing. You know, she can bring in Shabbos a half an hour before it's time and usher in the holiness before it's time. And as soon as she said that blessing, it's really Shabbos.
Excuse me, I just have to stop for 1 second. Because I will let you get to it. But I want to make sure you and I want to see if you and I really agree or not agree.
Okay.
According to Halakha, does not the lighting of the candles precedes Shabbat. And it is when the father of the house lifts a Kiddush cup around a family table and says Mikadesh HaShabbat.
For him.
No, for the family.
Okay.
Shabbat does not begin. Shabbat does not begin until the Kiddush has been recited, and the candles are to be lit prior to Shabbat. And if there's candles lit, by the way, in the midrash and in the tradition, the angels come and look for the candles. They don't look for the Kiddush cup. But the question about when does one say the Kiddush in that machloket in the Talmud, which ultimately resolves itself with Hillel saying, Shabbat begins when the family comes together and somebody lifts a Kiddush cup.
Except that you can have the flip side of it. You can take in Shabbos early, where it's then not Shabbos, even after Kiddush,
You're
necessarily
correct.
for
You're
everybody.
correct.
But okay, so I can only speak for how we do things.
Okay.
When I light Shabbos candles,
yes,
it's Shabbos.
Okay.
I can't then decide, oops, forgot to turn off the oven. Let me just go do that.
By the way, you're absolutely right.
So by virtue of my words, my speech in the proper time. Now, what's the flip side of it? If I don't say those words, Shabbos is coming with or without me.
No,
it's
that's
not waiting
by
for
the way,
me.
you are not wrong. You are not
Shabbos
right.
is going to happen if I never light candles.
No. Shabbat is not an accident of stars. If no Jew lights a Friday night candle and says Kiddush on Shabbat, it's not Shabbat. It is Friday. It is not Shabbat. Shabbat is created by the Jewish people, and it doesn't happen automatically,
so it's that lost
which is a very
right. Absolutely,
and it's a very important Jewish concept.
Yes.
That this is not something that happens because the stars are in alignment.
Right.
It's because Jews, when the stars are in alignment, sanctify that moment.
But the opportunity to bring Shabbat then is lost and can't be
right, and you've lost the whole Shabbat.
Regained. Absolutely.
But wait, and that's something we try to teach our people. In other words, how does a family miss a Shabbat? Do you understand? You'll never get that back.
For sure, but going into speech then, and the power then of speech, so it's what you were saying, that when you recite Eshet Chayil, you are making that a reality. there's the whole idea with the garments of our soul. There's machshava, dibor, and maisa, thought, speech, and action. And they can work in any order. By saying the right thing, it's going to end up flipping how we think and then affecting how we act. We can do the right thing, and that will likewise, change how we think. You can start anywhere in the process. Eshet Chayil is saying, now that we're coming together, Shabbos is Shalom Bayit. This is about having peace. You're going to say the right thing, and then you will end up thinking and feeling the way you should and acting the way you should by virtue of having started with your speech. So it's a very, powerful thing, and it's likewise very empowering in the compliments of, that idea. So I completely agree with what you're saying with the power of that.
We're meeting also on the occasion of America's celebration of Mother's Day. In some way, you understand, every Shabbat is a Mother's Day. But you mentioned early on, and I think, again, very perceptive, that there are some Jews who are uncomfortable with the Eshet Chayil because they feel it offends their egalitarian sense of what the Jewish people ought to be doing and what the Jewish tradition ought to be. And I wanted to hear what each of you have to say about this. Is Eshet Chayil in some way a reflection of Jewish sexism? Should it offend any Jew that a man says Eshet Chayil to his wife on Shabbat, there is no equivalent said for him, and that although on the one hand it really is the Jewish tradition's extolling of the mother, woman, wife, at the same time, for people who want Judaism to be all about equal, what would you say to them that they would be in some way misunderstanding if they were critical of the Eshet Chayil from this perspective?
Well, I think there's a big misnomer. Equal does not mean sameness. So you can have equality that has very different roles. To say that because a woman bears a child, so that makes her unequal then, or greater than her role in parenting as the father, absolutely not. Both were participatory in very different ways in bringing this child into the world. So I find that in general with Judaism, equality is not sameness, and to try to be the same, act the same, what you end up doing is just the opposite. So then the goal becomes not to celebrate the differences of men and women, and not to encourage and focus on the inherent strengths in both, but rather women then start acting like men. There's no middle ground. It's not that now we're the same. It's men are acting like men, and now women are acting like men. And I think having that ability to recognize and celebrate what those differences are, and we have that throughout, in terms of Eshet Chayil, as the whole thing about it, though, is in conjunction, not to her as this amazing woman on her own, to her as a wife, to her as a mother, to her as her role within this family unit that she's bringing together. And that's why we say, Beito zu ishto, right? That a man's wife is his home. And it's not that the woman needs to be in the house, it's that she is the house. Wherever she goes, she embodies within her family. And that's something that, not to say that a man can't also likewise be other-centered and have that concept, but this is something that is definitely specific and focused on in terms of the strength and the properties of a woman. And that's why I was saying before, differentiating between a Mother's Day that limits this power of woman only to one who has been able to bear a child, which I would imagine is phenomenally painful to women who suffer from fertility issues, who haven't been able to have children, who have chosen not to, there's no day for them, that in Judaism, it's Em Kol Chai, the mother of all life, that this idea is something that we're all connected to and we all relate to, and it's not something that you only qualify for if you're married or if you've had children, that the Eshet Chayil is something that embodies and focuses on the strengths that are unique to women.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So you sort of, put it in a bow for us now. Talk to me about what, from your perspective as a man, as a father, as a husband, how does the recitation of this gorgeous prayer for the mother, wife, woman of the household. And I love the idea, which is very Jewish, that the mother is the home. In any way, how do you feel about it? And when you hear people criticize Judaism for being, sexist, and we're not nice enough to women, and women don't have all the same rights, how does it play out for you?
I mean, at first it strikes me strange that the one time that Judaism seems to be favoring the woman, everyone says, but it's sexist. Come on, what does Judaism have to do? I explain a few things to people because this is brought to my attention. The first is, and I wrote about this, that when my daughter was born, it put Eshet Chayil into perspective. First of all, because I was saying Eshet Chayil to my wife, and then I was blessing my daughter. Actually, we were blessing, my wife and I together, bless our children. And two things became clear. One is that I was saying Eshet Chayil first, that my wife came before my children. But more importantly, I realized when I started blessing my children was that I wasn't blessing my wife. That blessings have to come from a greater to a lesser. A parent can bless a child. A teacher can bless a student. I was blessing my children, but all of a sudden I realized I'm not blessing my wife because I can't bless my wife because we're equals. I can praise her, but I can't bless her. And all of a sudden, the presence of the children made the equality of Eshet Chayil that much more apparent. But when people raise it to me, the first thing I tell them is, look, if it's bothering you, don't throw out Eshet Chayil. Go find something you want to say to your husband. Go say it. Just because we have Eshet Chayil doesn't mean we only have Eshet Chayil. If you find a biblical passage or something that you write or some response that you want to make to it that would make you happy, this is to the woman, that would make you happy, that would make you feel like there's sound coming from this end of the table and sound coming from that end of the table, then go for it. But the wrong thing to do is to say, because there's silence at this end of the table, then there should be an equal amount of silence at that end of the table. Mm-hmm. That's not getting anybody anywhere.
I want to end sort of where we began. I said to you, so many people don't do Eshet Chayil. And I think a lot of the reason has to also simply do with we're not used to, in a formal setting, saying to people we love in some kind of ritualistic way, but a beautiful way. I love you and I appreciate you. And if you don't grow up with that model, all of a sudden to do this at a table seems awkward. But what is true of life is it's only awkward the first or second time. And by the third time, it's a tradition. It's a tradition. It's a tradition.
And even if it's awkward, there's something about going against your grain for the sake of the relationship, for what the other person needs to hear, that even if it's awkward, that's what relationships are all about. Right? I'm going to do what's natural for me, and I'm going to do what's not so natural for me, because that's how we're going to work, because you might need what's not so natural for me.
It is my hope that as people hear the two of you, and the two of you are wonderful. I have enjoyed this so much.
Thank you.
Mark Perlman is off camera. Thank you for being here. Come over here. Bring a chair over here. Bring a chair. Just grab a chair and come sit next to me. You did a wonderful job here. This is Mark Perlman. Pull back and get Mark in this shot here. You don't have a mic, so you can't speak. But this is Mark Perlman. He's the one who put the book together, and he's going to make I can make to you, because of Mark, a very generous offer, which I'm going to do in a moment. But I want to tell the two of you, I have loved meeting you. I want you to come often. We should discuss just Jewish life. There are so many things you've said, some of these you've said that I would just wish I could have just spent an hour on that. So will you come back and do more with me?
It would be my pleasure.
Thank you both. Sarah and Jeff, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Again, you've just been listening to Sarah Esther Crisp, editor of thejewishwoman.org. You've been listening to Rabbi Jeffrey Siegelman, who's the rabbi of the Westchester Jewish Center. Two lovely, thoughtful Jews who have brought some real insight to bear. And I am so glad, this was Mark's idea, I am so glad that for Mother's Day we could do this. I have I've been blessed. We talk about blessing. It's true, a husband does not bless his wife. A wife is a blessing to her husband. And my wife Ruth has been a blessing to me, and you know, for all of you who enjoy Shalom TV, there'd be no Shalom TV without Ruth Golub. And you know, we have 5 children, and the home she has created is just extraordinary, and it's the most loving, most loving. I don't want to say anything, you know, I've got too loving. I got people all here who are loving. But my wife's the most loving, who's created the most loving home for me imaginable. And so to be able to do this program on Mother's Day, and I sort of feel, as both Sarah and Jeff feel, it makes me, you know, this is not a Jewish holiday. Every Shabbat is about the Jewish mother. But in America, we have a day. And so I'm glad, thanks to Mark, that we could do this on Mother's Day. And I'm very pleased to say, and again, this is courtesy of Mark, you know, I say to all of you, if you really love Shalom TV, if you believe this makes a contribution to American Jewish life, then I hope you support us with a tax-deductible donation. And I tell you that if you can make a donation of $36 or more, double high or more, we'll send you a DVD of whatever program you want. But thanks to Mark, I can say this to you. If you're in a position to help Shalom TV stay on the air, and if you make a contribution of double high or more, $36 or more, to Jewish education in media, then we will be able to send you compliments of Mark Perlman, the wonderful book that he has produced, More Precious Than Pearls, a prayer for the women of valor in our lives. Check should be made out to Gem and mailed to Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471, and just indicate you'd like a copy of More Precious Than Pearls. Thank you, Mark, very, very much. As always, my thanks to B'nai Zion Foundation for making us feel so much at home here. My thanks to you for being part of the Shalom TV community. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.
And to mothers everywhere, and especially to my wife, Ruth, a spectacular mamo to all of us. Happy Mother's Day. We love you all very, very much.
L'chaim is a presentation of Jewish education in media.